Yukio Mishima is one of the absolute goats of the autofiction genre. And if you don't know what autofiction is, autofiction, short for autobiographical fiction, is a genre of literature that combines elements of autobiography and fiction. In autofiction, details of the author's life blend with fictional information, characters, and events. And so, over the past 10 to 15 years, autofiction has become a big deal, especially because of the internet. Because many people, when they want to dive into fiction, draw from their personal experiences. We've all done it before. Many of our very first stories are about crazy things that happen to us, or the stories feature, wild people or people who we know from our personal life who fit the narrative. But eventually we grow out of that. And occasionally we will draw from our life and from inspiration. But autofiction is drawing from either writing about your entire life or these small moments in your life, a relationship, you at college, or some of these things, and just kind of blurring the lines and dramatizing it a little bit. And this isn't something new. If we look back all throughout time, people have written memoirs or written about their life and added some style and some dramatization. But the problem is about ancient literature. I know this is somewhat of a fallacy. For many people, in ancient times, unless they were in the aristocracy, they didn't have access to literacy, which prevented them a lot of the time, and not all the time, from accessing deeper states of emotion. And at the start of the 20th century, we cracked open, in terms of the global populace, our emotion because of information and entertainment and the world wars. We just all went on this internal journey and became the main characters. And because of this, there has been a lot more personal art that does go to a certain degree of depth. And now, because of public education, many Americans are literate. And I know countless kids who are the talented writer in class or the talented artist, and they want to become a writer. And what they write about is themselves. But the problem is that, for instance, one of the champions of modern autofiction is someone named Talin, as you guys see over here. And Talin got canceled a little while ago. But even though I don't really like autofiction or Talin, we still hold you in our heart, Talin. But the thing is that I don't need to be in Talin's head, and it's dumb to be, because he's just not interesting. And that's what I feel like with many of these people on Tumblr and many of the autofictioners. You are not an interesting person. Your thoughts are not that deep. Your emotions are not that deep. And now I have to read about them. But the problem is that they become popular because they aren't that deep. Because other people can resonate them. Other people who've walked through life following the lines, living in right angle land, people who, are still stuck in simulacra, they love this stuff. They eat it up. It's so popular. Go to any new writing website. For instance, I talk about Substack.com right now. Some of the more successful writers on Substack right now, even though I'm championing it as his literary platform, and it is, George Saunders, Margaret Atwood, Sherman Alexie, David White, countless other authors who are goats are over there publishing their work, Chuck Palahniuk. But some of the authors who have, been upstarts and built their audience from nothing and are full-time authors, many of them are autofictioners, girls writing about their love life and all these things. And they are talented, but it's just not that interesting. And it's not that deep because, for instance, there are masters of the craft like Nosgard up here. And there's a Norwegian author named Nosgard, and he wrote a great book that's huge, a series of novels named My Struggle. And it is a very deep autofiction dive, and I would recommend it to anyone. And I think that he's one of the best of all time. But let's circle back now to Mishima and why he's the best autofictioner. Mishima, especially in his novel Confessions of a Mask, which is basically the autobiography of his early life, from birth to, we'll say, 21 years old. As I'm sure you know, Mishima is a very idiosyncratic individual. He's wild. He's an aesthetic terrorist. He ended up staging, not actually attempting. He staged a coup so that he could commit an aesthetic death so that we would continue to talk about him. And all the normies would be like, oh my God, he tried to overthrow the government with 4 dudes. No, he didn't. But it's these questions. It's these thoughts. And it's when you start to realize, wait, there's this lover of fascism who's Japanese and modern, was living in the 70s, which is already kind of a head scratcher. Like, okay. And he's a celebrity, world famous, and he's bisexual. You're like, what? wait, because, all these conservative, our picture of the modern fascist, of the modern conservative, not to equate the two because conservatives aren't fascists, FYI. But in general, they are more often than not bisexual. But when it comes to Mishima, everybody makes an exception. The most radical people just kind of overlook it. I have friends who are definitely insane with their ideology in politics. They don't care about Mishima. There are YouTube channels out there dedicated to like making edits of Mishima, like throwing his hands up in Nazi salutes and being all crazy, who also like are pushing anti-gay stuff. Like it's like all these paradoxes, but that's what makes it awesome. That's what makes studying Mishima great. And so in Confessions of a Mask, we actually get inside his head. We get into where his obsession with sex and with death. And we recently had a book club this past weekend on Confessions of a Mask in the Right Conscious Book Club. And one of our members, Sarah, said that sex and death are inherently linked, which is absolutely true. I mean, you've heard it before, and this is like a very easy version, that the orgasm is the little death. But both are these ecstatic, crazy, unexplainable experiences. And if you know about the pleasure pain principle that's in the brain and regulates dopamine and all this stuff, those two polarities are, the highest level of pleasure, which is sex, and the highest amount of pain, which is death. And so Mishima, from a very early age, had a deep conception of these things. But what makes it great is that Mishima looks back at all this from a weird eye. Because the thing about autofiction, a lot of the time when I read it, I ask, who's telling this? And obviously the person who wrote it, or experienced it, is telling it. Like, this is Yukio Mishima. But how do you write about it? Narration and point of view is kind of a really great topic with autofiction and thinking about it, because how much distance, how far do you go away from the proximal as the narrator when you're writing about yourself? And what's crazy about Mishima is that and what makes him the best is that he lived in a time that must have been very confusing. He was raised to be a weakling. His grandmother basically made him hang out with other girls and was absolutely psychotic and separated him from masculinity. Then he wasn't able to go to the war and missed all that, even though he had this death impulse. And then he had to live in a reformed Japanese society where corporations basically and Western ideals cut off many of the principles and values that the Japanese had cherished. And Mishima had watched many of those corrode before the war had even began. Mishima's Sea of Fertility tetralogy, his final 4 novels, detail this in his first 2 novels, Spring Snow and Runaway Horses. It's all, and actually all of his books do, they detail how the West corrupted Japan long before Pearl Harbor. And this is really interesting to see because there's actually weight there. Talin going, deeper into his sexuality, or Nosgard even like going deeper into his emotions, don't necessarily matter because there isn't any weight there. There are no stakes involved. But there is never going to be a reintegration of East and West unless we're reading like North Korean autofiction or something weird. Like if the wall breaks, like everyone's been integrated, everyone's been exposed, even people in North Korea, like technology, all of these things. But Mishima came from a samurai family. He was embedded with these samurai ideals, the Hagakure or whatever, and wanted to take that forward, but he couldn't. He was living in this world, but he had lived in the old world. Many of us romanticize these things. We want to live this primitivist lifestyle and not bring in like all this technology that we were given when we were kids, or watch kind of go into the world. But it's not very noble. It's not very interesting. Oh, I want to throw away my phone. I want to quit porn. It's like, all right, that's awesome. And I get it. And we need to do all that. But the loss of a country and a culture, one of the best ever, and Mishima championing that to the last moment where he killed himself and calling for people to return to the emperor, which is silly. I don't believe in any moral authority. That's why I don't believe in democracy, because I don't believe that other humans have the moral authority to rule over other humans. But Mishima was holding on to that. He was holding on to transcendence. He believed in these crazy ideals of sex, death, art, Japan, the emperor, God, Shinto. And he looked at things like Buddhism and capitalism and many of these other communism, many of these other corrupting forces as these Western implants that weren't what the Japanese people needed. And obviously now when we look at Japan and the low birth rate and the depression and many of the other problems that they have, it's like, Jesus Christ, he was absolutely right. I mean, anyone who looks at that would have been like, yeah, this plan isn't going to go well. Western social engineering. How's that? I mean, we didn't have all the horror stories of, the Middle East and even America and all of our failures in social engineering yet, but it's never really worked well in history, except if you have like a tyrannical force behind it. And so Confessions of a Mask is not just, the Mishima's explorations into his bisexuality and which are absolutely crazy. Like seeing where he describes at length when he became a bisexual and his obsession with some of the young boys at his, primary school. He talks about this desire for death and suicide at a young age in a crazy way, because he only wrote this when he was 24. Some of the problems with like Nosgard at times, I feel like, and with autofiction is that there's so much distance. Like right now I'm 31. If I want to write about, let's say when I'm 6, that was 25 years ago. It's a long time. And if I was 50 and I tried to write about that, it was even longer. When I was 50, I want to write about when I was 20 and this happened, that's a 30-year gap. But Mishima was only 24 and was still actually inundated in that world. His father was like being his agent and still psychotically controlling him. And so he was still very much connected and could feel many of these spiritual ties he had. And so he could write about this stuff very eloquently. The other thing that separates Mishima from many of these other autofiction writers is that he was talented. He's a generational talent. Mishima was given a wristwatch by the emperor for, I think, being the valedictorian of his private school. He also took writing very seriously and trained himself in it, and writes very flowery and beautiful language and can dive deep and merge philosophy and many of these things seamlessly. And I don't think many of these modern autofiction authors can do that at all. And what makes Confessions of a Mask especially very great is that Mishima hadn't been confronted yet with actual philosophy, because there's something that happens when someone becomes too idealistic and too philosophical or too political. A lot of the time their art suffers, and I can't remember who it was. Some famous author said that philosophy was the worst thing that happened to Mishima because he stopped writing books like this. And I absolutely agree that Mishima, if he continued in many of his earlier novels, Life for the Sale, Forbidden Colors, are like these explorations of his life that are phenomenal, that are also amazing because they're not the old world, Japan was integrated. Japan had been westernized in these things. So you get this kind of zest of a different culture and an earlier time, pre-technology, pre-fentanyl, schizophrenic stream of consciousness stuff. But you get kind of some schizo stuff that still makes sense, because when I see a lot of these new people and all of this new autofiction, a lot of it doesn't make sense. We become so fragmented and splintered. It's just too disconnected. But Mishima feels like some of us. Like he feels, I should say, I could track how things went wrong. Like I can see the process. I can't see how the goth sad boy a lot of the time got to where he was, especially when they over-explain. I'm like, dude, you're just doing this for attention. Like, boom, bada, bam. Like, we're done. Like, hook, line, and sinker. That's it. Calm down. Sit down, son. But with people like Mishima, I can't discount him like that. There is depth there. There is thinking there. And his talent as a writer makes it even more beautiful. There is love in many of his autofiction novels. There are the explorations of his split bisexuality. There are explorations of masculinity in general and him trying to grapple with the hypermasculinity and then of pre-war Japan, and then the kind of emasculization of Japan after the war and trying to find his place in it. A lot of stuff that I think that all of us can really learn from. He's not scared to write about it. That's kind of what a lot of these new authors stand up on. But Mishima, and this is why I think he became famous, he just let it all out. There are going to be quotes and ideas in this book that you will take with you for the rest of your life. Many autofiction authors, I can't say the same. I feel like there are things that you could learn and characters you can fall in love with, but they'll just kind of percolate in your head and then fade away. Not with Mishima. And so this is why I think that he's the GOAT. And I think it's why everyone should read him. If you want the more personal stuff, the autofiction stuff, Confessions of a Mask is a great place to start. If you want his more philosophical stuff on beauty and aesthetics, The Temple of the Golden Pavilion is a great place to start. If you don't believe me, go watch Paul Schrader's movie, produced by Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas, mind you. Everyone wants to be like, cancel Mishima. Mishima is a fascist. Dude, George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Paul Schrader, still in a time that was only a couple decades after World War II, said, yeah, we can make a movie about this dude. Who gives a fuck? Now we're like, oh my God, go watch that movie and you will get an exposure to his life and to his works and what's going on. And then you'll be excited to be like, dude, how does this guy think? And so there it is, everyone. If you guys want to join my Substack, I should say, we read Mishima books probably every other month or so right now. We are slowly working our way through his works. We've read a lot of the major works. I would love to see you guys over on the Substack. I would also like to see you guys go check out some of my other videos on Mishima. There's a ton. Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Yukio and Mishima on YouTube. And so go check out some of those playlists, and I will see you guys in the next video.